And what I mean by that is people generally know when they've crossed their own boundary, right? Would you agree? Kind of like, when something feels off. Um, when people really know when they're like exhausted or resentful or disconnected or overriding themselves, where most people can look back on a situation and recognize what happened. So even though we've all had the experience of knowing something, we still may find ourselves doing the opposite, right? We've walked away from a conversation wishing we had said something different, or we agreed to something we didn't really want to do, or we found ourselves reacting in a way that didn't fully reflect the who we want ourselves or know ourselves to be, right? Can anybody relate with that? Yeah. And that's where we started to get curious. Because the thing is, if awareness alone created the change, most of us would have already changed the things we've been aware of for years, right? If you think about it, if knowing is enough, most of us would be changing it. So then we were like, okay, well, then what actually happens in that moment? What's the gap there, right? What happens when emotion enters the room? What happens when someone says something that lands differently than we expected? What happens when we feel disappointed or misunderstood or rejected or uncertain, or maybe even attached to an outcome or afraid of losing something that really matters? And what I've noticed is that moment, the emotion becomes strong. Our relationship with the situation often changes. We stop seeing only what's happening in the now and restart to relate to what meaning we're creating it to be. That's when we might start interpreting through a certain filter, right? A previous filter of an experience that reminds us of that, or maybe an experience that we've had with them in the past, in the moment where it triggers something that's deeper inside of ourselves. Or maybe we're protecting, right? We may even start to try to find certainty. And before we know it, we're having an entirely different experience than the one that originally occurred. And so that's what we're going to start to explore today, so we can kind of, yes, be aware of those moments and then really understand our own personal sense of what's occurring in us so we can go into and meet those part of ourselves. But not only that, not to stay there, to actually now move further, move beyond that. What's beyond that? And I think that we've spent enough time, a lot of us, looking at, okay, like, I get it, the inner child work. Okay, I get it, the deeper thing. I get it. Now let's start moving to the joy. Let's start creating the new inside of ourselves. So we're going to talk about why reaction happens, what they might be trying to protect, how our nervous system participates in the process, and knowing the human design, your own human design, can actually be such a useful lens for understanding emotional clarity. And then really exploring how we create enough space between what we feel and what we choose so we can respond in ways that feel aligned with who we actually really are.